Good morning, everybody. This is Mr. McGee here at Parkway West. The demonstration that I'm going to be doing today, we're going to be talking about the inspection of two-stroke components. In particular, the top end. So we have our cylinder, we have our piston, and we have our head. And though we're dealing with a motorcycle engine here, the only real difference between the motorcycle and the small engine two-cycle engine or the equipment engine technology would be the power valves, which would be on the motorcycle engine to change the dynamics of the exhaust ports. The inspection will primarily be identical. Now, before we get started, I just want to talk about here, obviously with our CIP 470699, this is going to cover items in task 600 where we will be using micrometers and doing various measure work, utilizing a bore gauge, utilizing our micrometers, and utilizing T gauges. Now, I'm not going to spend any real time on these because we've already gone over and we should have a pretty fair grasp on how we go about using the T gauges, a micrometer, and the bore gauge. This is more of what we want to look for while we're doing our inspection of our two-cycle engine. The other thing that we'll be covering is task 1000, two-stroke cycle engine, where we'll be doing explaining the operation, identifying the types of valves, inspecting service two-cycle exhaust systems. So this is kind of like a broad demonstration. So for our inspection, obviously the first thing that we're going to want to do is make sure that we have everything clean before we disassemble this, all right? First thing that we're going to be doing, depending on the engine, drain the coolant. If it's an air-cooled engine, then we don't have to drain the coolant. So we'll remove our head, and we're actually going to check our head for warpage utilizing a straight edge, across this surface when we're looking for any warpage. And that warpage, you're essentially going to put your straight edge across, and then you'll take your feeler's gauge and try to put it underneath of the straight edge. Let me find something here for an example for a straight edge. Now I know that this ruler is anything but straight, but the idea here is to lay this straight edge across here, and then we take our feeler's gauge and we're measuring wherever the feeler's gauge fits through, we're measuring the amount of warp and distortion within the head. Obviously, we're going to look for cracks and things of that nature and anything else that might be an issue, any damage within the combustion chamber, the squish zone, as this is called in a two-stroke engine. Really not a lot here that we can do for the head. Prior to tearing this down, I want to add that probably not a bad idea to do a compression check before we dive into all of this. Gives us some kind of idea as far as diagnostics go to get some idea of the condition of things. All right, the next thing we're going to look at is our piston. This particular one happens to be out of a YZ125 and it only has one compression ring, as you can see. We want to inspect the crown area for any damage, any divots, any cracks, anything that might be, showing signs of weakness. We want to inspect the skirting area for cracks. Sometimes detonation can cause cracks right in here and right in here. The skirting area, you'll note, is a little bit longer, and that's for stability. They'll also refer to this area on the piston, which is at a 90-degree angle from our wrist pin, as a thrust area. So what we want to do is we want to look for, scuffing and or scoring of the piston. Now, give you some idea, there's really not much damage on this side of the piston. This side of the piston almost indicates normal wear, but you do see some light marks, imperfections in the piston. That would be known as scuffing. And you can usually just take a Scotch-Brite pad and just clean that up and smooth that out. Now this side, on the other hand, this piston has had a ring failure. Now you can see these very deep score marks within the piston. Okay, it's over. There's no saving this. If you get scoring marks on a piston, note scuffing is just light blemishes, scoring is scratches. If you have scoring, it's time to replace this piston. This one actually only had about 4 hours on it, and the ring broke right here where the locating pin was, and it got caught in the exhaust port. But just to show you what you're looking for. Now the other thing that you want to do after you inspect the overall condition of the piston, I mean there's plenty of other things to look at here, but we want to take our dimensional checks, and you will find that the piston is wider here than it is here. So you're going to take your micrometer and you're going to mic this. You're going to record those numbers and you're going to compare them with what's in the book, what the book might call for as far as specs go. We also want to look at our wrist pin area boss. Look for scoring where the wrist pin was. Make sure there's no damage in there if we're going to reuse this. Obviously, as you know, this one is not in the best of shape. Cleaning out the ring gap, most of the times the best thing that you can do is take the old piston ring, break it, and use the ring to actually go in there and get all the carbon, if there is any, out of that gap, so that when you put the new ring on, excuse me, when you put the new ring on, that there is nothing in there to obstruct the ring so that it seats in there good. You should never use a wire brush. You should always use a brass or a soft bristle brush if you are cleaning a piston up. The wire can actually contaminate and scratch the surface of the piston, and that's what we're trying to avoid during an overhaul. Okay, now let's move on to our cylinder. When we are inspecting the cylinder on a two-stroke engine, typically, well, obviously you're going to check for warpage, just as we did with the head. So we're going to put our straight edge down, and we would be looking, going all along here, looking for areas where the feeler's gauge might slip under, like right there. Well, there, if I had the straight edge down. And we want to look for warpage, and we want to compare with what's acceptable in the overhaul manual. Further inspection, you want to look at the bore. Make sure that it's clean, make sure that it's not all scratched up. And we're going to use T gauges, or we can use our cylinder, our bore gauge, and we're going to go down through and we're going to measure the bore. On a two-cycle engine, it's typically at 4 levels. All the way at the top, just above the porting, just below the porting, and down at the bottom. Now we're checking for 2 things here. We're checking for an out of round condition where the cylinder is actually oval shaped. Typically on the thrust areas where the piston are, you're going to see more wear. So that would be like the front or the back. And we're also checking for cylinder taper. What happens is this cylinder will wear unevenly. And typically you're going to see more wear up here at the top because that's where our compression is highest. So we're going to want to take a series of measurements, and we're going to take our T gauge, which this one just fits, and we're going to take 4 measurements, 1, 2, 3 just below the port, and 4 at the bottom. And then we're going to rotate 90 degrees. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to write these down. We're going to record these numbers, and that's going to give us our indication as to if the cylinder is out of spec, if it is, if it's no longer round, if it's tapered too much. These are the checks that we've got to do to ensure that when we put our new piston ring in, that everything is good. Now the other thing with most two-cycle engines, as far as the cylinder bore goes, a lot of times it's coated. It could be a Nicosil bore, it could be a chrome bore. They'll actually put plating in here. So you really cannot, if it's out of tolerance and you want to get the cylinder bored, you really can't. The only thing you can really do with these, as with any engine, is you run a hone down through it before you put the new rings in, and that will help seat the rings, okay, by taking your hone and running it down through there. And you all know what our hone looks like. Obviously this one's a little bit too big for this engine, but you would run that down through. No, it does actually fit. And we're going to rough up the surface of the cylinder so that when we put our new rings in, not only is it going to help to seat the rings faster, but it also helps for lubrication purposes. So that's pretty much the whole thing in a nutshell as far as just your basic 2-cycle engine. Now let's talk about these, the power valve. If you are second year and you're working with motorcycle engines, you have a device which alters the size of the exhaust port, and it's called a power valve. And this power valve is going to sit right in this cylinder, like so, and it sticks down into the exhaust port area. And as the engine revs up, it actually pulls out of the port area and increases the exhaust port size. So you want to make sure that these are clean and they're decarboned. So we're going to take these and degrease them, use a soft bristle brush, nothing that's going to mar them. And you know, for the inspection purposes, we're going to take this out, we're going to clean it, inspect it, make sure that there's no cracks, make sure that these aren't, you know, chipped or broken away, and just do a general inspection of the whole cylinder. That's really about it for the 2-stroke top end inspection right there. I mean, you got your head, you check for warpage or any signs of damage, you have your piston, you're going to check all the dimensions on it and make sure that our ring groove is clean, and then we're going to turn around and we're going to check our cylinder dimensions to make sure that they're all good and that there's no cracks, and clean everything up. Okay, thank you.